G'day, May 40 here. So we learned during COVID that during a state of emergency, whether the state of emergency is real or whether the state of emergency is vastly exaggerated, all your rights that you thought were just God-given and inalienable, they can be taken away just like that. And boom, they're gone. A state of So that's how governments take power. They say, hey, we got a state of emergency. We have to dial back your rights. And so during COVID, right, your right to go to church, your right to go to work, your right to peaceably assemble to petition the government, your right to go to the gym, your right to see your friends and family, right, depending on where you were, these rights were taken away like that. And that's how it is in every democracy, right? Because no democratic system, no constitutional system can possibly make adequate provision for all the emergencies that come up. So we may think we have all these rights, but all our rights can be taken away like that if the people in power declare we're in a state of emergency. And Carl Schmitt had this observation that who is sovereign? He who has the power to declare that we're in a state of emergency and that the ordinary laws no longer apply. And so Donald Trump is invoking something of a state of emergency, and that's why we can no longer abide by normal procedures and protocols. But so far, the Trump administration is following court orders. But if he's been this active and this relentless and this bent on extending executive branch power over the rest of the federal government, then just imagine what he'll be like possibly in a real emergency. Now, he could turn out to be a kitten in some real emergency. Probably if he'd been tougher and harsher on COVID, all right, he probably would have been reelected. But right now, we're just under this absolute blizzard of executive orders. But just imagine what happens when he encounters something that can be dialed up to a real emergency. So, for example, with regard to the border, if you can invoke some real health emergency, such as we did during COVID, you can stop almost all illegal immigration. You can insist on a Remain in Mexico program, and this is what the Trump administration is doing. They're invoking health threats like tuberculosis. This is why we have to declare an emergency at the border. And when you declare an emergency at the border, right, you have a lot more power. So there have been a lot of articles about Donald Trump and the Carl Schmittian state of exception. Let's see what happens when we perhaps enter a real emergency.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Laura Ingraham. This is the Ingraham Angle from Washington tonight. My angle in moments. But first, if you think someone's stealing, let's say from your family, would you stand by and do nothing, especially when your family was already in financial trouble? Of course you wouldn't stand by and do nothing. You'd take extraordinary measures to protect your family. Well, that's what President Trump did when he decided to tackle government waste and corruption by unleashing Doge and Elon Musk, who gave a tutorial, by the way, in basic economics from the Oval Office today.
So we've got a $2 trillion deficit, and if we don't do something about this deficit, the country's going bankrupt. I mean, it's really astounding that the interest payments alone on the national debt exceed the Defense Department budget, which is shocking because we spend a lot of money on defense.
So the more you can establish that we're in a state of emergency, the more power you can unleash.
And if that just keeps going, we're essentially going to bankrupt the country.
In other words, letting the bureaucracy continue to run wild and unaccountable, it's not an option.
So what I really want to say is, like, it's not optional for us to reduce the federal expenses. It's essential. It's essential for America to remain solvent as a country, and it's essential for America to have the resources necessary to provide things to its citizens and not simply be servicing vast amounts of debt.
But those who profit off the decline of America, they don't care. Because the totally organic protesters descending upon D.C. almost every day that are organized by deep-pocket lobbyists and government unions, they're fighting to keep the federal kleptocracy going.
Elon Musk needs to keep his grubby hands, his greedy, grubby hands off of our government.
I wish Article 2 gave us the power to impeach fake presidents, too. Because I'd be putting in articles tomorrow morning to impeach Elon Musk, Donald Trump, and Elon Musk.
No wonder we're in such a mess. These are unserious people. They have zero solutions. They don't care what happens to America. And oh, by the way, it's just typical gutter language. But watching Elon Musk late this afternoon, it was obvious he's unfazed by all of that noise. And in fact, he kind of welcomes the scrutiny.
Your detractors, Mr. Musk.
I have to what?
Including a lot of Democrats.
I have detractors?
You do, sir.
I don't believe it.
Say that you're orchestrating a hostile takeover of government and doing it in a non-transparent way. What's your response to that criticism?
Well, first of all, you couldn't ask for a stronger mandate from the public. The public voted. We have a majority of the public voting for President Trump. We won the House, we won the Senate. The people voted for major government reform. In this presidency, they are going to get what they voted for. And that's what democracy is all about.
Of course it is. He's absolutely right. Even Elon's adorable 4-year-old son sitting on his shoulders and standing right next to him can probably grasp that concept. Because President Trump knows his arrangement with Musk is unusual, and it is, let's face it. Giving Elon Musk the floor to speak directly to the American people, it just came off as brilliant.
I fully expect to be scrutinized and get a daily proctology exam, basically. I'll be scrutinized nonstop. But with the support of the president, we can cut the budget deficit in half from $2 trillion to $1 trillion, and then with deregulation, because there's a lot of sort of regulations that don't ultimately serve the public good. We need to free the builders of America to build. And if we do that, and that means if you can get $1 trillion of economic growth and you cut the budget deficit by $1 trillion, between now and next year, there is no inflation.
And like a great teacher, he explains what that actually means to the average Joe out there.
That's a fantastic scenario for the average American. I mean, imagine they're going down the grocery aisle and the prices from one year to the next are the same, and their mortgage, all their debt payments dropped. How great is that for the average American?
That's great indeed. But did this impromptu Musk tutorial, did it impress any of our favorite media malcontents?
President Trump and first buddy Elon Musk at the Resolute desk in the Oval Office defending their aggressive efforts to overhaul the government and root out fraud.
There are certain contracts and certain spending at the federal government that Mr. Trump and Mr. Musk don't like. That is what has largely been canceled.
Irony died while he was talking. The only unelected party in any of this is Elon Musk.
All right, joining me now, Texas Congressman Brandon Gill. Congressman, great to see you. The Democrats have been...
So in the run-up to the 2024 American presidential election, you heard from a lot of the experts, and particularly from Democrats, that the economy is great. Why is there such a disconnect between economic reality, as reflected in various government statistics, and the public's perception of the economy? So why didn't the public get it? Why didn't the public understand how strong the economy really is? All right, I'm reading from an article in Politico. And so experts and people on the left said, well, it's these bloody right-wing echo chambers. They're conning voters into believing entirely preposterous narratives about America's decline. Now, oh my God, Ricardo's in the chat. Blessings, Ricardo. Hail, Ricardo. Hail our people. So, now I've just completely lost my track of thought. Okay, so thank God I have presented to you the insight that we did not evolve to be gullible. And so if tens of millions of Americans have been recognizing that the economy is not nearly as good as the statistics suggest, that probably means that there is a significant disconnect between the statistics and the reality. So I'm not someone who venerates intuition or common sense above all other values. So sometimes you can believe your lying eyes, Ricardo. Sometimes you can believe your lying eyes. Josh Allen, Buffalo Bills quarterback, really did achieve a first down by at least a third of a football. It was definitive. It was clear. The Bills were robbed. The Kansas City Chiefs did not belong in the Super Bowl. They did not deserve to beat either Houston or Buffalo. And it sure did look like the refs were giving them slanted calls in their favor. On the other hand, there are many other instances where I don't believe that you can rely on your eyes. So, for example, all those videos about voter fraud, right? If you had expertise where we saw articles discussing these videos with regard to voter fraud during the 2020 election, then the evidence for voter fraud was quite weak. So sometimes you can rely on your lying eyes. Different people have different gifts. Right? Different peoples have different gifts. Different nations have different gifts. Right? You can rely on your lived experience, your eyes for those kind of measurements. You can recognize that there are certain physical cues to how smart someone is, how likely they are to commit criminal violence, whether they're likely to be cautious or fast, whether they are likely to be rule followers or rule challengers, right? You can decode many of these things simply with your eyes and your life experience. Other times, right, you should not rely on your intuition and your feels and your eyes, right? Other times, expertise is important. So sometimes academic studies are useful. Other times, just a bare knuckle reporting is important. Other times, your first-hand experience is the most important thing. There is no God-given reason why any one particular source of truth is just going to outweigh all other sources of truth. Now, if you have to choose between your own life experience and what the news tells you about the world around you, you will, in general, be much better off served relying on your own life experience rather than on what the news and what experts tell you about most of life. But let's take things that are big picture, fancy statistics about inflation and economic growth. Why have tens of millions not experienced this great, strong Joe Biden economy? And so this article in Politico makes some excellent points that our official numbers tell us that unemployment is low, that wages are growing, that economic growth is lifting all boats year by year. But when you travel the country, you see something different, right? You see large numbers of homeless. Our cities appear increasingly seedy. There are whole regions of this country that seem derelict, right? You see all these awful homeless encampments, right? There's one in Washington, D.C. outside the Federal Reserve itself, right? And so on the whole, Democrats seem much more inclined to believe that what the economic indicators report, that's the real truth. Republicans are more suspicious of these official bureaucratic pronouncements, and they are more likely to believe what they see and experience. So Republicans put a higher amount of trust on their own lived experience and what their own eyes see. Democrats put much more trust in expertise and government pronouncements. So in general, when you tune into the news, this is what you get. You get bureaucratic pronouncements, all right? You get information from the government, crime statistics, inflation statistics. You get sources from the government. You get businesses making pronouncements, right? What you get in the news is overwhelmingly the production of bureaucracies. So when Donald Trump was shot last summer, okay, so someone with some knowledge of rifles recognized that that was a long-distance shot and that was an assassination attempt. And they would have known that within about 5 seconds of hearing the shot, even if they were just watching it on the internet or on TV. From a journalist perspective, you do not say assassination attempt until a major government bureaucracy has done research and has come back with a finding of that was an assassination attempt. So this is an example of your own eyes and your own life experience can tell you in 5 seconds what it took the news about 8 hours to pronounce. This is an assassination attempt. Okay, so what are the implications of this major gap in perception between Republicans and Democrats, between those who experience the economy firsthand and believe that their own lived experience is more accurate, and those who rely on government statistics. All right, so the author gathered a whole team of researchers under the Ludwig Institute of Shared Economic Prosperity to delve into the most frequently cited headline statistics about the economy. And this is my favorite way of getting to the truth, right? Take my life experience, what I see with my own eyes, the official story, the official statistics, right, what the New York Times says, and then also get some dissident voices, and out of those multiple sources of possible truth, try to figure out what makes the most sense. And what makes the most sense with regard to the economy for most Americans is that individuals' perception was far more reflective of reality than government statistics. Now, the data collected by various agencies is not fake, generally, right? The people staffing these agencies are not doing the dirty to us, but the filters that they use to compute the headline statistics are flawed, and so they paint a much rosier picture of reality than bears out on the ground. So take unemployment. So the news may tell us that we only have a 4% unemployment rate, but the official unemployment rate undercounts the number of employed in dramatic ways. So it counts as employed the millions of people who are unwillingly underemployed, right? People who only work a few hours a week while still searching for a full-time job. They are counted as employed. It does not take into account the millions of Americans who become so discouraged they no longer try to find a job. And it does not account for how much money they make. So you could be homeless on the streets, making just an intermittent and meager income, and you could be incapable of keeping your family fed, and the government would still count you as employed. So the official figures are that we have an unemployment rate of 4.2%, right? And this is counting numerous homeless people doing occasional work, right, selling drugs as employed. Now, if you change the filters so that you include unemployed people who can't find anything but part-time work or who make a poverty wage, so $25,000 a year or less, right, then you realize 24% is the more accurate unemployment rate. So in real terms, 1 in 4 American workers is unemployed in America today. Right? This is not something to celebrate, and this makes a good case for tariffs if they will lead to more Americans being employed. Now, what about earning? So the prevailing government indicator, weekly earnings, tracks full-time wages to the exclusion of both the unemployed and those engaged in part-time work. So the official statistics tell us the median wage in the United States is $62,000. But if you track everyone in the workforce, right, the part-time workers, the unemployed job seekers, then the median wage is $52,000 a year. So American workers on the median are making 16% less than the prevailing statistics indicate. Now, what about inflation? So Democrats were saying, look, inflation's no longer an issue. What about in the real world? Well, the official inflation statistics are really looking through a rosy looking glass. And if you are struggling to get by, you understand that inflation is much more severe than official statistics indicate, right? Because basics like groceries, healthcare, and rent are skyrocketing. So prices for eggs, for insurance premiums, for studio apartments, right, they are skyrocketing, and those of luxury goods and second homes, not so much. So the real inflation rate, the cost of living for Americans with modest incomes, has risen more than a third faster than the official statistic. So the resources required simply to maintain the same working class lifestyle over the last 2 decades has risen a third, more than a third, more dramatically than we've been led to believe, particularly during the pandemic. All right, the official statistics for inflation in 2023 said it was just up by 4%, but a truer cost of living shows that it rose by 10%. So wage gains, according to official statistics, vastly outpaced inflation during the COVID crisis. But this is really only true for people who are highly educated, right? For the median American, right? The average, the median American, their purchasing power fell by over 4% in 2023. So the economic reality for most Americans in the run-up to the 2024 election to today is dire, right? Economic reality for most Americans is dire. Now, if you have a 401k, if you own your own home, then if you're a college graduate, you're probably doing pretty well, right? People with a bachelor's or advanced degrees have, since 2013, been thriving overall, right? So about 10% of Americans are just doing great. Those without high school degrees have had no improvement in their standard of living. In fact, have gone backwards over the past 20 years. So we have places like San Francisco and Boston where there are big jumps in income and prosperity, then other places like Youngstown, Ohio, to Port Arthur, Texas, falling further behind. So our official economic indicators point in a misleading direction. They shroud the reality faced by most Americans. Right? Some Americans came out ahead after 4 years of Bidenomics. Most Americans did not. Right? For most Americans, the 4 years under Joe Biden were bad. Right? They were a negative experience for the bottom 60% of American earners. So I love official statistics, but we need more than just official statistics. Now, you're probably wondering, are we in the middle of a constitutional crisis? 40, could you find me some news media figure on the left who talks to a constitutional law professor, perhaps at Georgetown, who's also on the left, and let us know if we are in the midst of a constitutional crisis.
That they're trying to pressure the courts. And so, right.
And you think that's what's going on?
Yes, 100%.
Not ignore, but pressure. Bring political pressure to bear on that.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, look back at the, you know, if we just look back at the first Trump administration, which I think in retrospect is going to look like the JV, you know, maybe even the freshman team version of what we're seeing here. You know, look at the travel ban, right? I mean, so the first version of the travel ban was this chaotic, massively overbroad, poorly executed, you know, airport craziness-inducing phenomenon that was quickly blocked by the courts, and that the Trump administration didn't even really appeal. Then they went back to the drawing board and tried the second iteration of the travel ban, right? And it was a little more nuanced, it was a little more sort of careful, and it sort of left out the most obvious problems, and that was blocked by the courts. So they went back to the drawing board, and they did the third version, and that was ultimately upheld by the Supreme Court, right? Even though, Chris, if they had started with the third version on day one, I don't know that the Supreme Court would have upheld it.
It's so, just very quickly, one of the things, it's so interesting you said it, because one of the things I think, and I think Trump does it.
Okay, that was a key point. Did you hear that? If they'd started with their executive order banning immigrants from 7 majority Muslim countries, it would not have been upheld by the Supreme Court. But because they did so much shock and awe and more extreme versions previously, right, they got it through. It's like the New England Patriots when it comes to their defensive backfield, right, particularly against the the St. Louis Rams in the Patriots' first Super Bowl victory, right? They just mugged the star Rams running back, and then this is how they beat the Rams and Peyton Manning. They would just mug the receivers and dare the officials to throw flags in a major playoff game, and so they got away with, you know, a lot of things that they otherwise would not have.
This politically and now legally, I always compare it to a basketball game. If you start the basketball game and you tell your team, look, we're going to try and steal the ball, we're going to press them, we're going to try and steal the ball in every single play, you can foul the shit out of them. Make them call it. Make the refs call it. The refs are then forced into one of two options. One, call all the fouls that they would if that wasn't your strategy and foul your whole team out in the first quarter, or adjust, do that, and thereby let things that are by legal definition a foul, right? And that sounds like what they're sort of doing. It's exactly, if the third version was the first version of the travel ban, it wouldn't have passed Supreme Court muster. But because they had gone so far out, and then they'd gone a little less far, and a little less far, it winds up working.
And I think that's right. And so, you know, I know that folks are inclined to believe the worst of everything this administration is doing. And frankly, they've done nothing to dispel that reaction. But I do think that insofar as this is a concerted strategy and not just a series of sort of flashpoints and whack-a-mole. I think the notion is not to set up like a constitutional confrontation with the court so much as it is to put so much pressure on the courts that the courts can't possibly push back against everything. And the result will be that, sort of 2 years from now or 18 months from now, a lot of the stuff will have been struck down, but Chris, not all of it. And in the meantime, we have both chaos as you have the necessary sort of trying to figure out like what the rules are on a day-to-day basis when you have such fast-moving litigation. And then Trump also gets to have, a boogeyman, which is, look at the reason why I wasn't able to do all the things I promised was John Roberts.
Yep,
right?
He failed us.
Citizenship case, which he really put a lot of effort into. He lost the case about trying to rescind DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals immigration program. Chris, he lost the 2 subpoena cases in 2020.
Yep.
And, the court had opportunities after the 2020 election to put at least some of its, prestige behind some of the challenges to the election. And Chris, it sat on its hands.
Totally. Did nothing.
Which is not which I think was a good thing, right? Right. Responsibly sat on its hands, right? Turned away all of the emergency attempts to get the court to step in.
I remember the one that what's his name in Texas? Yes, Ken Paxton brought, and they didn't hear it. I mean, they basically were like, this is my non-legal assessment. It was this is beneath contempt answer.
I mean, basically. So against that backdrop, right? This is a different court. I mean, we're now on the far side of not just, Justice Barrett's appointment, but also, the court that decided Dobbs and Bruin and, the major questions doctrine and, the Trump immunity case. So, yes, it's a different court, but I think this is a court that is still going to believe that it has some responsibility to be a bulwark. And just, one really small data point. I mean, I think this has already been lost to history, but right before Trump's inauguration, he had tried to get the court to block his ultimately sort of slap on the wrist sentencing.
I cite this all the time. Please, yes, go.
Right, and in the New York hush money case, and he lost 5-4. Now, there are folks on sort of in my orbit who can't believe there were 4 votes to let him get away with that, and I get that. But it's worth emphasizing there were 5 votes to not, and it was the 3 Democratic appointees. It was Chief Justice Roberts and it was Justice Amy Coney Barrett. And I think Chris, any sort of big partisan tinged rule of law fight involving the Trump administration, that's going to be the lineup to look for. Are Roberts and Barrett going to side with the Dems to stand up for our institutions?
And I have been criticized by some people who subscribe who say that I'm too Pollyannish about the threat that Donald Trump represents, that there aren't going to be elections in 2028. If there are,
the globalists gathered in Paris, and they got a friendly but firm earful today. Vice President J.D. Vance had a message to world leaders about America's plans regarding the future of AI. The simple message: if you want our business, you're going to have to treat us right. We'll work with you, but don't think of taking advantage of us or bullying American corporations.
The Trump administration is troubled by reports that some foreign governments are considering tightening the screws on U.S. tech companies with international footprints. Now, America cannot and will not accept that, and we think it's a terrible mistake, not just for the United States of America, but for your own countries.
I love when they pan to the faces, the grim faces. We used to be able to take advantage of Joe Biden, but not you. Well, what specifically was Vance referring to there?
Many of our most productive tech companies are forced to deal with the EU's Digital Services Act and the massive regulations it created about taking down content and policing so-called misinformation. And of course, we want to ensure the internet is a safe place. But it is one thing to prevent a predator from preying on a child on the internet, and it is something quite different to prevent a grown man or woman from accessing an opinion that the government thinks is misinformation.
It's about time that a U.S. official called out Europe's attack on free speech right to their faces. Look, the Europeans aren't even trying to pretend at this point. Officials there are openly calling for censorship of American social media companies, including X and Meta. And back in August, remember when Musk was about to interview then-candidate Donald Trump on X? An EU commissioner warned about a risk of amplification of potentially harmful content. At the time, I was thinking, harmful to whom? Well, to the global bureaucrats, of course. So why should American taxpayers continue to subsidize this to the tune of tens of billions of dollars in defense costs when countries that don't protect basic freedoms in their own countries continue on? Well, our new Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, also overseas, had another blunt message for our allies. Time to ramp up your military spending and do more to defend yourselves.
The European continent deserves to be free from any aggression, but it ought be those in the neighborhood investing the most in that collective, individual and collective defense. As the president talks a lot about, common sense is you defend your neighborhood and the Americans will come alongside you in helping in that defense. Most NATO countries are already close to 2%. We believe that needs to be higher.
Yeah, in other words, the free ride is over, kids. It's been 80 years since World War II ended, and America is up to her ears in debt. Friends don't let friends drive drunk, and friends don't let friends mooch off of them forever. But to the old foreign policy establishment, asking Europe to do more, it's always considered an insult and even dangerous because it plays into Putin's hands, don't you know? Well, that's absurd. It's out of step with what most Americans want at this point. But then again, the old guard is so used to foreign policy failure and running roughshod over what the American people actually want that they really can't relate to this innovative approach. Thus, when Trump floats the idea of taking back the Panama Canal or even figuring out a way to buy Greenland or taking over Gaza, heads explode.
This is like a bully in the schoolyard looking around for someone small to push around. You know, so far we've had Greenland and Denmark, we've had Canada and Mexico. This is autocratic behavior.
Trump is threatening to further destabilize the region. It's just a disaster. It's kind of a disgrace. He's humiliating our allies.
It's a disgrace. But is a U.S.-led rebuild of Gaza any crazier than sticking with the status quo? Do they have any ideas for how to deal with that? And how is continuing a massive trade deficit with Canada fair, given how much security we provide them? And how is it not insane to give China a foothold in a major shipping lane that we paid for? So if there's one unifying theme behind Trump's approach to other countries, it's this. You're not going to rip us off any longer. And you won't get something for nothing.
We were paying almost all of NATO. It was unfair. We take care of the military, and then they take advantage of us on trade. You know, they're very tough. I'll tell you what, the EU on trade is horrible. Canada is just about the lowest payer in the whole thing, which is very unfair. You know why they're low payer? Because they think the United States is going to take care of them. You think that's fair? It's not fair.
And Ukraine also will need to pay up for the hundreds of billions we spent there. Trump Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is headed to Ukraine for a frank discussion.
They have tremendously valuable land in terms of rare earth, in terms of oil and gas, in terms of other things. I want to have our money secured because we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars. I told them that I want the equivalent, like $500 billion worth of rare earth, and they've essentially agreed to do that.
So expect a lot of wailing from the free riders and the defenders of the free riders as President Trump puts America first. And as he methodically restores balance to our relationships around the world with pragmatism. But in the end, Europe, Mexico, South America, Australia, they're going to have to decide whether they wish to partner with the United States or be run over by China. Trump's betting they're going to choose to stick with us. And, of course, he's right. And that's the angle. Joining me now, Peter Navarro, White House counselor for trade and manufacturing. Peter, great to have you on tonight.
So I love this TV series by Taylor Sheridan, Lioness, and I didn't think I would like it. I was quite reluctant to watch it. I do not believe in women in combat, and so this is a spy series that shows women out there being spies and in combat, but a lot of strong male characters as well, and I don't allow my ideology to stop me from enjoying something. So my only test for a TV show or a movie is, does it hold my attention? Does it hold me in a compelled state? And as long as I don't feel awful afterwards, I'm going to watch it. And season 2 of Lioness just completely kicks ass. And I just want to play a few seconds from season 2, episode 5, but I don't know how you can watch season 2, episode 1 and not go, wow, this is fantastic entertainment. So let me Just forward to the good stuff here. Nice dinner conversation. All right, so we've got a family, and the father seems to be is the brother of a major narco drug kingpin in Mexico.
5 de agosto, 5 de octubre, all the time there was a cinco de something.
Okay,
And
so the
she was
daughter
always
used to
with the
drink a
boys.
lot,
She ran
but
in the back of her.
now she doesn't drink so much because
They didn't
the
take your
daughter
license.
has joined the U.S. Armed
Military
Forces.
pilots aren't issued licenses, only civilian aviators.
So you can get one.
And they court-martial her so that they can try to sneak her in undercover. And her father has some strong views on the decline of the American military and American civilization.
I guess if I pass the test, I don't know how dishonorable discharge affects the process.
What did you do that was dishonorable?
I didn't do anything dishonorable.
Then why were you discharged?
So sometimes the most evil people can have the sharpest analysis, right? Some of the most evil people I have met have had the sharpest, most accurate perceptions of me.
Ustedes vieron la noticia. I don't know what I'm supposed to say. Tell them the truth. State Department sent officials to our base through known enemy territory without notifying the base for proper escort. I was sent to provide cover, which I...
Right, and this is just the cover story so that she gets an official court-martial and then they can smuggle her into the narcos.
I did, but rather than they take the blame themselves, they decided to say that I initiated the assault. What actually happened was that I saved their fucking lives.
Hey.
Sorry. Oh, here we
One thing I love about Latino culture is that it does not tend to be woke, right? It tends to have pretty strong male versus female distinctions.
are.
Right, here's the
How many
dad's
Apache
analysis.
pilots are women?
I don't know.
I do. I looked it up. 82 out of 1,500. The Army does sensitivity training now. When I served, there was none of that shit. There was no bathroom of the gender you decide you are today or any of that bullshit.
There are just such great monologues in this show, but they don't feel like you're eating your vegetables, right? Somehow they just work. So I love the monologues, and I don't even notice, they don't get in the way of the story development. It's unusual to be able to put a long monologue into a TV show, and it just works organically, and it's not woke, it's not left-wing. Right, this is a trad analysis.
Army can't get anyone to enlist anymore and put up with that shit, so they got no choice. Recruit women. Recruit men who think they're women and women who think they are men.
Right, this is Taylor Sheridan. Right, all his shows, of which I'm aware, they have these trad critiques, these lengthy, thoughtful trad critiques of modern decadent America. Right, you'll find it on his show Landman, you'll find it in Yellowstone, and you'll find it on Lioness.
My point is, of all the people to make an example out of, a woman seems like a terrible choice in this new army. They should have given you a medal.
So, where is it streaming? Pretty much all of Taylor Sheridan's shows stream on Paramount. So, a channel that nobody ever heard of hosted the most watched TV show in America for years, Yellowstone. All right, Taylor Sheridan, like single-handedly, has brought Paramount Plus to people's attention.
But I said,
You in the army?
as a Marine,
What specialty?
as a Raider.
You see what I mean? Women and fags and fucking ladyboys and dykes, that's our army now.
Pablo!
Right? You don't expect to get this kind of trad critique of American decadence and Weimar America and gay America on a network TV show. But Taylor Sheridan delivers.
I was damn good at my job, Dad.
I don't question that. The first sign an empire is failing is when its people question the institutions the empire was built on.
Right, you get these long, extended, thoughtful, traditional critiques of modern degeneracy.
The structure of government, the churches, the schools. They reject God because the emperors begin believing they are God. And the people become so rich, everyone believes they are an emperor as well. And too good to do the jobs that built the empire in the first place.
Right, I think that is a pretty good sign of a country in decline, when people increasingly regard workers beneath them.
So they outsource those jobs.
Right, the most noble thing that most people can easily do that will be both good for them and good for society is to get a job, or to become an entrepreneur and enable other people to have jobs. Right? It is incredibly ennobling as long as what you're doing is legal and you can talk about it publicly. Right? If you're not ashamed of what you're doing, chances are it'll make you a better person.
And they open their borders to allow people desperate to do all the other jobs.
Right? Open borders, bring in slave labor to do the low status jobs. Right, sign of a country in decline.
The other people are too rich to do. Then comes the guilt for all this wealth. But still...
Right? I mean, he is painting a damning picture of America, and he's tied into a Mexican drug cartel. So just because you're tied into a Mexican drug cartel doesn't mean that you may not see vast swaths of reality quite clearly.
The empire thrives. But now everyone questions their wealth. Then they question themselves. And then they reject everything that built the empire to begin with. They destroy their own symbols, attack themselves like a cancer, attack the people who protect the empire, attack you for protecting it.
Right. As soon as we allow the lawyers to start overseeing our military in such a detailed and intrusive way, another sign of decadence.
Then the wolves come, and all the people who lived like emperors will know the suffering they blame themselves for creating.
Right. If you are soft, right, if you are not taking steps to protect yourself, the people you love, your community, your home from the wolves, all right, the wolves are going to come and they're going to feast on your bones.
And they will be slaughtered. And the new empire will rise from its ashes. And then the cycle begins again.
Yeah, pretty good analysis there from a narco associate. Right, back to Laura Ingraham here talking to Peter Navarro.
The faces.
Let's see, Laura.
The faces in the crowd today were hilarious as Vice President Vance spoke about a relationship with Europe. Now Europe is threatening reciprocal tariffs. I know you've heard the comments from Germany and France. Your reaction tonight to what they heard from you all yesterday regarding tariffs?
Hey, here's an idea. The EU runs like hundreds of billions of dollars of a trade surplus every year. Why don't they use that money to pay for NATO? Hey, there's an idea. Stop the corporate welfare. Fact is, Laura, they cheat us. You know how many cars they sell us versus how many we sell them? They got a VAT tax, a value-added tax that works just like a tariff that they've been sticking to us for years. And it's just, I mean, it's such an imbalanced trade relationship. And what Donald Trump's going to do is he's going to level the playing field, make it fair again, both for national defense and economic security reasons. The steel and aluminum tariffs we did this week are a great start to that. And by the way, the EU is a tremendous part of the overcapacity we have in steel and aluminum, and they're dumping it their governments are responsible. You know, it's like a €1 billion here, 3 billion there, subsidizing these steel and aluminum industries to attack the United States. So these bureaucrats in the crowd, Laura, they don't know what hit him. I mean, Donald Trump is moving so fast, he's float like a butterfly, sting like a bee.
Why is Donald Trump so powerful? Right? He's not enjoying huge levels of popularity. His levels of popularity about 53% approval rating. I think his power depends in large part on doing the impossible. Right? Virtually no expert thought he had a chance to defeat Hillary Clinton in 2016, so he did the impossible then, and virtually nobody after January 6th thought for a couple of years that he had any chance of regaining the office of the presidency, and then in November 2024 he does the impossible again. Now he's governing in a way we have never seen before. Right? He makes the Reagan Revolution look like a Tea Party. So when you have a charismatic leader who does what looks to be impossible and then repeatedly does what looks to be impossible, right, people respect that. And Donald Trump enjoys an enthusiastic, passionate following. So just like the mullahs in Iran, they govern that country with only 20% support because the intensity of that 20% is stronger than the opposition, 80%. And Orthodox Jews are only about 15% of American Jews, but they exercise disproportionate influence in Jewish life because they are so committed and they are so intense. Also, Donald Trump doesn't only command the base, he shows the only realistic path forward for Republicans to appeal to the working class, to become the party of the working class, to cut back on immigration, to rejigger our trade arrangements to benefit the American working class. And he has a lot of common sense. For example, he is halting enforcement of laws that ban bribery of foreign officials. All right, this will make it easier for American companies to do business overseas.
They've found the speed bump they've been looking for. Of course, they're filing lawsuit after lawsuit, I think 40 lawsuits so far. And that has allowed them, because they have some judges who are finding their way, or what I'm seeing more often is just they're winning temporary restraining orders to say, you can't enforce that law until we have a full hearing on it. Like, I need it to be briefed and I need a full evidentiary hearing for me to understand what's going on. And they're like, oh, it's a huge win. We're shutting down Trump's ability to change the government. And then when Trump says, I don't think you actually do have the ability to stop me from doing this. Constitutional crisis. It's a constitutional crisis. He's not listening to the judiciary. Meanwhile, there's literally only one example of him being ordered to resume payments to federal agencies, where then the plaintiff said he didn't resume doing that fast enough. And the Trump team filed a brief saying, actually, we are making all of these payments in the following few fields. They were never affected to begin with, but we're still doing our assessments under the other fields that he wanted to see if the funding's proper on. And the judge did not say, you're in contempt. You're in huge trouble for doing that. The judge said, you got to do it. You got to resume in all of it until we have our hearing. So the judge doesn't think it's a constitution. There's literally just one case in which the judge said, you didn't quite do what I told you to do. Please do it. And the Trump administration, I think, is going to do it. They haven't said we're not going to do it. If the judge says do it and the Trump team says we refuse, then we're closer to actually having a crisis between the branches. This judge is going to get overruled. The feds are allowed, the executive branch is allowed to control a lot of how the money gets spent, whether it gets spent. They can't shut down entire agencies that are authorized by Congress, but they do have a lot of control over money and whether to spend it. And I realize that these various plaintiffs don't like that. The Democrats don't like that. But it's going to play out in the courts. And I think, as I said last night, 9 out of 10 of these cases is going to go Trump's way. So we are not at a constitutional crisis yet. He has not flipped the bird to any judge telling him he must do something yet. Who has done that? Joe Biden. That actually was Joe Biden. And I don't remember these same people freaking out. But take a look at some of the coverage over, honestly, all Trump has done is issue executive orders and then gotten sued so far.
And what we are experiencing is a power grab. It is a constitutional crisis. It means wholesale harm for everyone who calls this country home. So we have to litigate. We have to legislate.
The
we have to agitate. We have to
Presley.
organize peacefully in these.
We are witnessing is a constitutional crisis. We are seeing an executive branch that has decided that they are no longer going to abide by the Constitution.
And now these boys from Doge roll in violation of the Constitution, in violation of the law, in flagrant violations.
I think this is the most serious constitutional crisis the country has faced, certainly since Watergate. The president is attempting to seize control of power and for corrupt purposes. The president wants to be able to decide how and where money is spent so that he can reward his political friends, he can punish his political enemies. That is the evisceration of democracy.
Now, where were all these people when Joe Biden was trampling on the Constitution? I mean, repeatedly, but I'll give you one. After the Supreme Court blocked his, quote, student loan forgiveness program, former President Biden, at the time still in office, spoke openly about how proudly he was bypassing the high court's ruling. Watch.
We cannot let this decision be the last word. While the court can render a decision, it cannot change what America stands for. Tens of millions of people in debt were literally about to be canceled, their debts. And the Supreme Court blocked it. They blocked it. But that didn't stop me. I announced we were going to pursue alternatives. The Supreme Court blocked me from relieving student debt. But they didn't stop me. I'm relieving the burden of student debt. And the Supreme Court told me I couldn't. I found two other ways to do it.
That was fine. He added an amendment to the Constitution with a tweet. That was fine. Okay. And those were not the only examples of his lawlessness. He was fond of ignoring the Supreme Court. Remember his rent abatement program? That was another time, and around the high court. And we're not talking about a lower federal district court judge. Let's be clear. In the federal system, you file your lawsuit, you're at the district court level. That's the trial court. You lose there, you go up to a federal court of appeals. Now you're getting more serious. And you lose there, you go up to the U.S. Supreme Court if they'll take your case. So far, all Trump has had against him is some federal district court orders. Not a court of appeals, certainly not the Supreme Court. That's the one Joe Biden was ignoring. The Supreme Court of the United States. There was not a Democrat meltdown. Now, the Dems have had some success recently at the federal district court. Judges have temporarily blocked Trump's spending freezes. That's what I just referred to, and then ordered him to resume the spending. His executive order saying birthright citizenship is no longer going to be allowed for the children of illegals. Let me just tell you, Trump 100% knew that would be blocked. There's zero doubt he understood that was going to be blocked. He is trying to tee up an appeal that will go up to SCOTUS. He's not dumb. The lawyers advising him are not dumb. They know that that's going to go up. His buyout offer for federal employees has been paused. That's the judge who said, I need this briefed. I got to figure out what's what. Trump has every chance of still winning that case. And I actually think he will win that case either before the district judge or when it goes up in appeal. And then there's Doge's access to the Treasury's payment system. The Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent.
Okay, so do you remember how upset the Democrats were with the courts during the years of the Biden administration in particular, right? So here's CBS correspondent Jan Crawford eviscerating the calculated effort to undermine legitimacy in the Supreme Court by Democrats. Right, this is from last fall.
It really started and took off in the wake of the Dobbs decision. The court's ruling that overturned Roe versus Wade. The outrage over that decision was so extreme that you saw, I think, a quite calculated effort to undermine the legitimacy of the Supreme Court by Democrats, Senate Democrats, for example, hearings, stories about scandals, some of which were pretty overblown, to say the least. So that has an impact on public opinion. You know, the public starts to believe that this court is corrupt, that this is, it's on the take, none of which is true. I mean, this is still a court. You may disagree with their decisions. It's a very conservative court. It is not a corrupt court. These are 9 justices who have very different views on how to interpret the Constitution, who are kind of in this titanic struggle over law, not politics. Even the immunity decision. I mean, that decision was so misreported to say that the court was going to save Trump from a criminal trial. No, it wasn't. That was never the decision. In fact, that decision is going to help protect Joe Biden from any future prosecution by Donald Trump if he wanted to do that. So, when we look at public opinion polls, sure, the court's taken a hit, but that's true over the years. The court often takes a hit. So do other institutions. And the court's opinion, court's public opinion remains much higher than our other institutions, including the White House, Congress, and by far the news media.
Right, so everything has to be placed in its situation. So you compare the legitimacy of the court the Supreme Court, right, with our other major institutions, it's doing pretty well. So good comment here on X. Democrats blitzed the legitimacy of the courts during the Biden presidency. It was a well-funded, well-organized campaign. It's hard to take them seriously now that the courts are suddenly back to being sacred. Now the courts are sacred because they are the Democrats' only chance to stop Trump.
Welcome to Jesse Waters Prime Time tonight.
So if people receive money, they don't complain, obviously. But if people don't receive money, they do complain. And the fraudsters complain the loudest and fastest.
Dozing out in the Oval.
It's mind-blowing.
It's not that long ago that I was right there with them. When I can get down, do push-ups, deadlifts with the troops, I love that.
Talk the talk and walk the walk.
Trump's coming for our unions. He wants us all to fail, but we want him in jail.
Democrats going, gone.
We have to Trump.
Plus,
take a deep breath for just a moment and ponder big balls.
she should have taken the buyout. Mary Comans just got doged. The CFO of FEMA got caught going behind Trump's back. 47 signed an executive order that was very clear. And this lady says, watch this. I'm going to send $60 million to Manhattan so Biden migrants can keep staying at luxury hotels. Musk caught her red-handed. Mary should have known FEMA was on shaky ground. Trump just said the agency should be terminated. Just last year, FEMA got caught skipping homes with Trump yard signs. And Mary thought it'd be a good idea to sneak $60 million to migrants. Trump's famous for saying you're fired. This lady's out of her mind. And now she's out of a job. Read the room, Mary. The whole government's being audited. The Department of Education's being actively dismantled. The Dozers are in the building on the 6th floor, canceling grants and contracts. Nearly $1 billion of wasteful contracts were ripped up yesterday. Like this one. A contractor was paid $1.5 million to observe mailing and clerical operations at one mail center. This guy was observing mail being opened and being sent for $1.5 million. This is the kind of no-show job a mob boss gives their cousin. Doge also terminated 29 DEI training programs at the Department of Education worth over $100 million. That comes to $3.5 million for each training program. Most of you've gone through DEI training programs. You're, in with HR for an hour? Maybe it's just an online course. Cha-ching, $3.5 million. What? I should have been a DEI consultant. One DEI session trained teachers to force students to recognize their privilege and their history of oppression. Half the classroom can't read, but this is what they're doing. Doge just shredded 18 contracts at the Department of Agriculture. One of them was for Central American Gender Assessment Consultant Services. We were paying a guy in El Salvador to assess gender. What does that have to do with agriculture? Here's another one. Forest and Gender Consultant Services in Brazil. Or this. The Women in Forest Carbon Initiative Mentorship Program. You go, girl. Elon says Doge also canceled a $17 million contract to provide tax policy advice to Liberia. $17 million to help Africans do their taxes. We even paid college tuition for Al-Qaeda. We gave a jihadi a full ride to Colorado State. Here's how the shell game works. You get taxed. Congress sends your money to a federal agency. The agency sends it to a Democrat nonprofit. The nonprofit president takes a fat salary, sends some of it to a subcontractor, and donates the rest to Democrats.
I see a lot of kickback here.
There's a lot of kickbacks.
A tremendous kickback, because nobody could be so stupid to give out some of these contracts, so he has to get a kickback. So that's what I got elected for, that and borders and military and a lot of things, but this is a big part of it. And I hope that the court system is going to allow us to do what we have to do. We got elected to among other things, find all of this fraud, abuse.
We're $36 trillion in debt. Money's flying out the window. None of the departments can pass an audit.
The reason that departments can't pass audits is because the payments don't have a categorization code. It's like just a massive number of blank checks just flying out the building. So you can't reconcile blank checks. You've got comment fields that are also blank, so you don't know why the payment was made. And then we've got this truly absurd, a do not pay list, which can take up to a year for an organization to get on a do not pay list. And this, we're talking about terrorist organizations, we're talking about known fraudsters, known aspects of waste, known things that do not match any congressional appropriation, can take up to a year to get on the list, and even once on the list is not used. It's mind-blowing.
We're literally sending out blank checks that no one can track with no explanation. It's like the system's designed to perpetuate fraud, from USAID to Social Security.
There's crazy things like just cursory examination of Social Security, and we've got people in there that are 150 years old. Now, do you know anyone who's 150? I don't. Okay. They should be on the Guinness Book of World Records. They're missing out. So, you know, that's a case where, like, I think they're probably dead. It's my guess. Or they should be very famous, one of the two. And then there's a whole bunch of Social Security payments where there's no identifying information. Well, like, why is there no identifying information?
Why did it take Musk to find out all this fraud? Social Security administrators are dealing, how should I say this nicely, with people who are about to die. Shouldn't they know around when people usually die? If you're still sending checks to a 150-year-old, nothing rings a bell. If the check hasn't been cashed in 50 years, that's a problem. And if the check has been cashed, that's a problem. Here's why nothing's ever done. Listen.
Really, everything is geared towards complaint minimization. So then you understand the motivations. So if people receive money, they don't complain, obviously. But if people don't receive money, they do complain. And the fraudsters complain the loudest and the fastest. They approve all the payments at Treasury. Because if you approve all the payments, you don't get complaints. But now we're saying that, no, actually, we are going to complain. If money is spent badly, if your taxpayer dollars are not spent in a sensible and frugal manner, then that's not okay. Your tax dollars need to be spent wisely on things that matter to the people. I mean, these things, like, it's just common sense.
The complaint system runs Washington. Anytime you try to cut anything, the Democrats, the media, the lobbyists, the NGOs, they all complain. So for about a century, Washington's basically like, okay, we'll just keep sending the money. Washington forgot how to say no. And now every woman in the Amazon rainforest who claims they're a climate consultant gets your money. Do you ever wonder how people work for the government and get so rich?
We do find it sort of rather odd that, you know, there are quite a few people in the bureaucracy who have ostensibly a salary of a few $100,000, but somehow manage to accrue tens of millions of dollars in net worth while they are in that position, which is, you know, what happened at USAID. We're just curious as to where it came from. Mysteriously, they get wealthy. We don't know why. Where does it come from? And I think the reality is that they're getting wealthy at the taxpayer expense. That's the honest truth of it.
Millions of bureaucrats were working for the federal government, working from home, and they never wanted to leave. I wonder why. One reason is because they have it too good, but there was another reason. They weren't allowed to leave.
This is actually, I think, a great anecdote, because we're told the most number of people that could retire possibly in a month is 10,000. We're like, well, why is that? Well, because all the retirement paperwork is manual on paper. It's manually calculated, then written down on a piece of paper. Then it goes down a mine. And like, what do you mean a mine? Like, yeah, there's a limestone mine where we store all the retirement paperwork. And the limiting factor is the speed at which the mine shaft elevator can move determines how many people can retire from the federal government. And the elevator breaks down sometimes, and then nobody can retire. Doesn't that sound crazy? There's like 1,000 people that work on this. So I think if we can take those people and say, like, you know what, instead of working in a mine shaft and carrying manila envelopes to, you know, boxes in a mine shaft, you could do practically anything else. And you would add to the goods and services of the United States in a more useful way.
Here's the government mine, where we house our paperwork because we won't computerize it like the rest of the world. We have 700 people working in an underground tunnel. What are we, Hamas? It's not like it's a top secret bunker. It's just where we keep Mark McGonagall's retirement folder from the Department of Commerce. How are we just finding out about this? There wasn't one whistleblower who was like, hey, Washington Post, I commute to work down a 200-foot mine shaft every day, and there's no computers down here. We do everything with a Bic pen. I can't breathe, and my hand's falling off. I'm literally being shafted. Didn't we pass labor laws in the 40s against this? And Democrats are supposed to be pro-labor. Shouldn't they want to save these workers from these backwards conditions? No. The Democrats want to keep the limestone mine open.
Which side are you on? We'll fight against Doge. We'll fight Elon Musk. No Elon scab within our walls. We'll fight from dawn to dusk. Oh, which side are you on? Which side are you on? Tell me. Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Trump's coming for our unions. He wants us all to fail. He wants us to bow to him, but we want him in jail.
Musk wants to rescue these government gremlins from working underground. And what do they want? They want to throw them in jail. Or they just scream.
We are all willing to work with anyone who's serious about doing the work of censoring the American people and advancing progress.
And for every American who doesn't want some weird Elon Musk suck up,
that Elon Musk needs to keep his grubby hands, his greedy grubby hands off of our government.
Situation seemed hopeless in the heart of the Jim Crow. KKK was very active. Situation seemed hopeless.
And I'll tell you, I'm from Jersey, so I look at it a little differently. I say Trump.
I don't swear in public very well, but we have to Trump.
The Democrats just came out as pro-mineshaft and pro-terrorist tuition and pro-blank check. Musk and his teenage deputy big balls are saving us $1 billion a day. $1 billion a day. And have uncovered what could be the biggest kickback scheme in American history. And the media wants his head on a platter, or something else on a platter.
Democrats are in the minority, so you have only so much leverage. Have you all essentially made it clear to Mike Johnson that until they allow you all to subpoena big balls and the normalized Indian hate guy, at least subpoena them or subpoena Elon Musk?
Democrats are judge shopping and getting liberal justices to rule against Trump for finding fraud.
Billions and billions of dollars in waste, fraud, and abuse. And I think it's very important. And that's one of the reasons I got elected. I say we're going to do that. Nobody had any idea it was that bad, that sick, and that corrupt. And it seems hard to believe that judges want to try and stop us from looking for corruption, especially when we found hundreds of millions of dollars worth, much more than that, in just a short period of time. And we want to weed out the corruption. And it seems hard to believe that a judge could say, we don't want you to do that. Well, so maybe we have to look at the judges, because that's a very serious, I think it's a very serious violation.
Bill Clinton, Al Gore, Barack Obama. Democrats used to be about modernizing government and fighting corruption. So did the media.
If I give you $1 billion and you can't tell me what happened to it, that to me is wasteful. That means you are not responsible. But if you can't tell me where it went, then what am I supposed to think? And when there has been reporting, I mean, this is not, look, I'm not saying this is on you and that you caused this, but I think it's a tough argument to make that.
I'm pretty sure I didn't cause it.
an $850 billion budget to an organization that can't pass an audit and tell you where that money went, like, I think most people would consider that somewhere in the realm of waste, fraud, or abuse, because they would wonder why that money isn't well accounted for.
Anyone standing in the way of Doge tells me they might be on the take, or they're benefiting from a wicked system. Democrats just got slaughtered in every battleground for putting illegals over citizens, teacher unions over students, criminals over victims, transgenders over girls. And the first war they wage against Trump puts corrupt bureaucrats over hardworking taxpayers. Good luck with that. Glenn Greenwald's the host of System Update, and he joins me now.
Okay. So Kip notices something going on with Jesse Waters. Let's hear it for Jesse's loud inhales between breaths. Why can't Jesse breathe more quietly? A lot of public speakers have this program, and you cannot gasp for breath without tightening and compressing your neck. And when you tighten and compress your neck as you're gasping for air, right, it's going to also dry out your mouth, right? If you take in air through your mouth as opposed to through your nostrils, right, it's going to dry out your mouth. And you're going to be, as your neck compresses and tightens, you're going to be putting all sorts of unnecessary pressure on your larynx. And so this is the origin of the Alexander technique. There was an actor in Australia named F.M. Alexander, and he noted that when he would do his performances that he would lose his voice. And so he set up a triptych of mirrors and noticed what happened when he went to perform. And what happened was that he would tighten up, his feet would grasp the floor, and there would be all these layers of unnecessary tension and compression throughout his body, and he would start gasping for breath, which would dry out his mouth. When he would gasp for breath, you can't do that but tip your head back, so you're compressing your neck and tightening your neck. And when you tighten and compress your neck, that sends ripples of tightness and compression throughout your body. So it's a whole series of bad habits which is not easy to let go. So the Alexander technique approach to breathing and to pretty much everything is to let go of these unnecessary habits of subtraction and compression. So it's a technique of subtraction. You learn to subtract those habits that do not serve you, such as gasping for breath. So Alexander technique does not believe in breath manipulation, unlike, say, Kundalini yoga. So when I went to Kundalini yoga, I did a lot of damage to myself that cost thousands of dollars of physical therapy and couldn't fully be repaired. And eventually, after a couple of months, I realized I need to stop doing half of the procedures. So there's something called breath of fire, where you're breathing in rapidly, and you can't do it but by tightening and compressing your neck. So people often go to yoga because they want to get fit, but in the process of getting fit, or they go to the gym to get fit, right, they add in and increase so many layers of unnecessary tension and compression that they're actually often worse off from trying to get fit. So whatever you're doing in yoga, if it's causing you to unnecessarily tighten and compress your neck, it's probably a procedure that is not good for you, and you'd be better off skipping. And there are some procedures, such as breath of fire, where there's no way you can't help but compress your neck. So people like to think, I'm doing XYZ to achieve my goal, but in the process of doing XYZ, you're actually taking yourself farther away from your goal. Goals tend to narrow you. Anything that tends to narrow you will also tend to compress you and tighten you. Right? Goals narrow your vision. Goals tempt you to cheat. Right? Goals distract you from all sorts of other possibilities. I'm not a big believer in setting goals. So if instead of having a narrow list of goals, right, you can move more into a state of awareness. When I look at both sides of the room simultaneously and everything in front of me, then you can't help but start to go up, which is the opposite of unnecessary tension and compression. So yes, breath retention, breath manipulation exercises can make you feel amazing, But there's a huge price to pay. You are installing destructive software on your system. You will have more compression, more tightness. You will move less easily as a result of doing breath manipulation exercises. So what you really want to do is to let go of your manipulation. Let go of all your unnecessary tightness and compression and just allow the breath to flow in and out through your nose, preferably, not through your mouth. So Steve Saylor has an interesting post here. Why are liberal and progressive organizations so much less effective at resisting Trump in 2025 than they were in 2017? One reason might be that all the DEI promotions and hirings in Democratic Party allied institutions over the last 8 years have undermined their effectiveness. The left-wing operative told me that shifting from Jewish men to women of color has degraded the effectiveness of many Democratic Party institutions. So the DEI philosophy was there are magic institutions. You just put people in those institutions and they'll become magical. Not so fast.
I will stick more to the political and rhetorical arguments against Doge and Elon Musk. Before we get into the legal stuff, I will reserve that for the experts, but there's been this sort of resounding cry from the left, including columnists in the Washington Post and New York Times and all over X and I guess Blue Sky, if you follow that sort of thing. I know I don't, but unfortunately, we sort of have to see their posts from time to time just to know what the left is saying. But they've been saying, well, Elon Musk, nobody elected Elon Musk. Nobody elected Doge to come in and look at the Treasury payment system or to go through USAID or whatever other areas of government waste he's been flagging for the president. And I mean, first of all, on its face, the argument's pretty stupid because Elon Musk was very prominent on the campaign trail with Donald Trump. He first appeared at that rally in Pennsylvania, the return to Butler. He continued to attend rallies after that. He was at Capital One the night that Trump was inaugurated. He was at all the balls with the Trump family. He dumped like $400 million into the Trump re-election campaign. And Through America PAC was a huge part of the grassroots ground game for the Trump campaign. So it was no secret that Elon Musk was going to be a part of this effort. Doge was announced pretty early on, from what I can remember, if not shortly after the election, then before the election. This was not some like well-kept secret from the American people. Trump went to the rocket launch. He talked constantly on the campaign trail about how much he loved the fact that Elon was able to catch this rocket as it came back down to Earth. So that makes zero sense. And even the left at the time was talking about Elon Musk's presence on the Trump campaign and how concerning it was and how this was a billionaire basically buying Trump. Another billionaire also makes no sense. But that argument on space is farcical. But then when you get into some of the specific allegations about the Treasury payment system, for example, there was a lot of fear mongering over Elon Musk has your social security number. Why does he have access to that? We didn't elect him to be able to look at our private financial information. And I wrote an op-ed about this for the Daily Caller. And I think this headline pretty much sums it up, which is Elon Musk has your social security number. Well, so do tons of unelected bureaucrats. I mean, if you just go through the different departments within the government that probably have your social security number, and all of the unelected bureaucrats who work there can access it for any myriad of reasons. Like, sure, there's technically privacy boundaries related to that, but nonetheless, I don't think any of us really believe that all of these bureaucrats are abiding by those in the first place, but they can still see it for a number of different reasons. I mean, if you took out student loans, the Department of Education has all of your financial information. The IRS has all of your information because they are the ones collecting your taxes. You're filing your tax returns with them. The Treasury Department's Bureau of the Fiscal Service is responsible for doling out your tax refunds. So they have all of your financial data. And of course, the Social Security Administration, which literally gave you your Social Security number. And if you're receiving Social Security payments, they probably have even more of your financial information. So we're talking about hundreds, if not thousands, of unelected bureaucrats who have had access to this in the entirety of the modern federal government and federal bureaucracy. This is not unique to Elon Musk or the three guys in Doge who apparently only have read-only access and only had read-only access since the beginning of their efforts to the Treasury payment system. And on top of that, Katie Miller, who's the spokesperson for Doge, as well as independent reporting from the New York Times and CNN, have all confirmed that everyone who's involved in this has the proper background checks, security clearances to be able to access this data the same way that any of those other unelected bureaucrats would. So this is sort of a desperate cry from the left, I think, to try to turn around the
Okay, let me get back to talking about the Alexander technique. All right. So how the Alexander technique can help you overcome wrinkles. All right. Wrinkles are often one example of unnecessary muscular tension. All right. You tense your face, you make wrinkles. Right. Your brow gets furrowed. You are creating that with unnecessary tension. Right. When you feel tense in your face and you tighten and compress, the skin around your eyes and your lips will become tight and you'll look like a scarecrow. So when you release unnecessary tension, right, you let go of postures on your face, right, you let go of your willed performance on your face, right, then you can become alive to the moment like this, right? Would you rather look like this or would you rather look like this? All right? Sweet. So when you listen to my sparkling wit, all right, your face lightens up and you just rejoice to be alive at this moment and to be receiving my wisdom. So here's one Alexander technique teacher. Imagine you're making a bed. There is a wrinkle in the middle of the sheet. You try to smooth it out with your hand, but you'll just move the wrinkle around, right? This is like lower back compression. It's analogous to the wrinkle. So the most effective way to eliminate the wrinkle would be to tug on the ends of the sheet and take out the slack that is creating the wrinkle. And so rather than being flaccid when you do the Alexander technique, right, you have a general upward direction. So you don't want to be slack. You don't want to be relaxed, right? You don't want unnecessary tension, right? You need some level of tension to stand up, but you don't want to have unnecessary tension. The more difficult the topic that I'm discussing, the more bewildering some tech issue I'm dealing with, I can't help but have increased levels of tension. And sometimes, right, certain amount of tension soars you, certain amount of tension serves you, and other amounts of tension, right, take away from your best functioning and your highest level of performance. So in the aging population, posture will always change for the worse, right? The older people get, the worse their posture gets. So particularly from age 20 to 80, stature tends to shorten, the waist tends to thicken, the chest flattens, the head begins to thrust forward and down, right? So you see an increasing surrender to the inexorable forces of gravity. But gravity can be your friend. You can notice gravity and you can become more alive and aware by expanding your field of awareness, and you'll start to move up. Many people accept deteriorating changes in their appearance as unavoidable. Other people rely on cosmetic surgery, fitness programs, fitness equipment, supplements, spa treatments, weight loss programs to slow the effects of aging. But none of this addresses a person's underlying levels of unnecessary tension and misbalance that will degrade your appearance, disrupt your healthy functioning, right? Postural change is active rather than passive, right? So your muscles contract, and that's what produces a change from good to bad posture. So due to stress, injury, due to sadness and depression, due to conscious and unconscious learning, the disruptive contractions, right, accumulate into a habit over many years. And when this happens again and again and again, right, the result is poor posture and pain. So Robert Rickover wrote about 14 years ago. He's the son of Admiral Hyman Rickover, the creator of America's nuclear navy, and he is also an Alexander technique teacher. And so he's talking about an article in the New York Times. Doctors see a big rise in injuries as young athletes train non-stop. So typical injuries were stress fractures, cracked kneecaps, frayed heel tendons, damage to the alignment of the spinal column brought on by excessive flexing. So doctors in pediatric sports say they've happened on a new childhood disease, and the cause is the over-aggressive culture of organized youth sports. So one of the dangers of yoga in particular is that you'll feel socially compelled to keep up with everyone else, and so you'll often be incentivized to do grave amounts of damage to yourself. So probably most Westerners over the age of 30 probably should not do yoga. Now, a lot of pressure comes from parents and coaches and the pressure to perform will usually result in increased tension, which will usually reduce the performance level. So in the early years of the fitness boom in the late 1970s, early 1980s, there were all these newspaper reports about severe shin splints caused by prolonged running on concrete, to serious back and neck pain due to bad methods of lifting weight. And so many people go out there and say, oh, I want to get fit, but they end up doing far more damage to themselves than if they'd not done anything at all. So how you do your exercise, right, how you talk to people, right, often matters more than what you actually do, right? People naturally tend to focus on quantity of exercise and how much weight they can lift, and they, in the rush to achieve a certain quantity, they obliterate concern with the quality of how these exercises are performed, right? When you talk to people about fitness, they will usually talk about how many miles they can run, how many pitches they can throw at such and such a speed, how many hours they can swim, right, rather than what they are doing with their body as they run or pitch or swim, right? You can drive a car fast for a long distance without bothering to learn how to drive it well. So an overemphasis on quantity is one of the main reasons there are so many fitness-related injuries. So how you do things frequently far more important than what you do. Right, the quality of your movement, the quality of your use of yourself, the quality of your relationship with yourself, quality of your relationship with other people, right, is often much more important than anything that you do. So I like this interview.
Hello, this is Robert.
This is Robert Rickover.
The patients would be quite grateful not to have root canal treatment and go off happily, but I would be left wondering, what is this pain from? Why? Although I knew it wasn't from inside the tooth, they were still suffering, and I wasn't quite sure. And after I've been in my Alexander training, I realized that a good portion of these people were suffering from unnecessary, harmful muscular holdings of the head, neck, and back. And I realize now in retrospect that if I would have just been keen enough to observe these people as they walked to the chair and sat down in the chair, that I might have been able to help them with their pain. My belief and my understanding of pain of the head, neck, and back is that, as Janet Travell, who was actually Kennedy's personal physician, said that pain of the head and neck and back is 90% muscular holding patterns, and I believe that to be an understatement.
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting that you would say that you, before you had any Alexander training, you sent the people away feeling a little uneasy about that because you weren't able to help them. But it is also true that a lot of dentists do work with TMJ, and I'm assuming that you're, having studied the Alexander technique, that maybe your approach to TMJ might be different than
yes,
most dentists. Would that be fair to say?
I think there's a growing trend among dentists to recognize that the movements of the lower jaw, or what is called the mandible, is not a joint-centric, or it's not something that happens in a bone-to-bone relationship or a hinge-type movement, but rather these movements are controlled by muscles.
So this is Robert Rickover, the son of the creator of America's nuclear navy, Hyman Rickover, the admiral. And he is talking here with a dentist and Alexander Technique teacher, Martin Goldman. And Martin's specialty is endodontics, right? People are sent to him for a differential diagnosis by other doctors and dentists. They want him to rule out the possibility that the pain of the pulp, the blood vessels, and the nerves inside the teeth might be causing the pain. So if the pain is coming from inside the tooth, you treat that. But if it's not, if the patient does not need to have root canal treatment, right, you can go off happy. And often, where is the pain coming from? Right? The pain is often coming from unnecessary muscular holding patterns in the head, neck, and back.
I think it's important for someone who wants to perhaps be able to undertake a way to relieve their own pain, to become their own therapist, so to speak, recognize the suspensory nature of the lower jaw. I think that's a fact that can only work to people's benefit who are suffering from what is called TMJ. First of all, is kind of a catch-all phrase. It's also called craniomandibular disorders or craniofacial pain disorders, or more accurately, temporomandibular dysfunction. TMD is.
So the Alexander technique got a mention in the final episode of season 1 of Girls. So Hannah's gay ex-boyfriend appears with his new rich boyfriend.
Well, you know, you're in luck because I actually need a roommate.
Oh, I mean, that would be great. Can we do this?
Oh, it sounds like kismet.
And you know what? We would have so much fun. We both have HPV already.
I know, right?
So that offers things off the table.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
You both have what?
HPV.
What is that?
Human papillomavirus.
It's, you know, it's like that thing.
A sexually transmitted disease.
Yeah, but for girls.
That he gave me.
And
You've got it too now.
Well, we can discuss this in a...
He seems great.
I know, right? And rich as fuck.
Why are you even trying? You hate sweet stuff. So you don't have to worry.
About what?
About moving in, because I found someone.
You found someone?
Yeah, this is going to sound crazy, but it's Elijah. And he's moving in next week, so if you felt obligated, don't. Also, he just told me he's getting certified in Alexander Technique, which is the gayest thing I've ever heard in my entire life.
Hey, getting certified in the Alexander Technique is not the gayest thing you ever heard in your entire life. But if you see me, working like in public, like one bloke working with the other bloke, and it's like you're taking out their arm and saying, notice these unnecessary holding patterns you've got here, and let's try to create a little more freedom in the neck, and think about width across your back, and you're doing all these very gentle movements, but it's not gay. It's Alexander Technique. There was some teacher who got arrested for fiddling with boys in the UK, and he said he wasn't fiddling with boys, he was just teaching them the Alexander Technique.
What the pain caused from muscular holdings is more accurately referred to. The temporomandibular joint can be affected by clenching or unnecessary holding of the jaw, and there can actually be pathology in the joint, but I think the answer lies in being able to release these unnecessary muscular holdings. The suffering of people afflicted with TMD are legion. Some of the symptoms of TMD are crippling headaches, destruction of the dentition, disturbed sleep patterns, pain up and down the shoulder girdle and into the arm. There's just a widespread variety of symptoms that people who are suffering from this unnecessary holding exhibit. And a lot of times they'll seek medical treatment first because they don't really think that these far-flung symptoms have anything to do with the way that they're holding their lower jaw. And typically physicians will prescribe either muscle relaxants or analgesics, potent narcotics, and all of these have a price to pay. And I think that for a good portion of people, that relief can come in an organic, sustainable way without punishing the rest of your body. And indeed, by freeing your jaw and freeing your neck, there can be benefits throughout your body.
So,
in terms of balance, coordination.
Right. So would it be your suggestion then that someone who is suffering from TMJ, that maybe the very first thing they do is gather some accurate information?
So I had a physical therapist tell me I had the worst case of TMJ that he'd ever seen. And I think the Alexander technique has helped me make some progress with this. Adam Bailey is another Alexander technique teacher who was interviewed by Adam Rickover. And he tells Rickover, when I was a kid, sports were easy, sports were fun, but as I got older, for reasons I couldn't figure out, sports became more difficult. There were even days when sports became a struggle, and I didn't know why that was until I discovered the Alexander technique, which showed me that I was putting more effort, more strain, more compression, more tension into sports than I needed to. So when I was a young child, I only put in the necessary amount of effort, but little by little as I got older and coaches told me to try harder and put more effort into it, I started trying harder, putting more effort in, and that was the problem. My muscles became tense, more tense than they needed to be, and my performance suffered. So the instruction to try harder will usually have a negative influence on the outcome. A better instruction would be to try something different or to try doing less so that you can carry out the movement and the sport more easily. Right? Think less about winning, more about how you approach the sport. Are there areas of the sport where you're getting tense? If so, can you subtract the tension in those areas? So when we are kids, we have this natural alignment of our head, neck, and spine. But because of tension that is built up through negative habits of pulling down and muscular compression, we interfere with our natural alignment. So with Alexander technique lessons, you start to rediscover your natural alignment. Right? Less tension, better alignment, you'll have better performance in work and in life. So you start focusing on the process rather than the end gaining, the outcome. So usually fitness regimes focus on quantity, not quality. Faster, lift more weights, longer workouts, but not enough attention is paid to how the athlete does what he's doing. Right? When you focus on the process rather than the goal, it doesn't mean you give up the goal. Right? It just means that you think about how you are operating and how you are aligned. And if you think about and pay attention to the process, the goals start coming by themselves. All right, it's not easy to work directly on somebody's fear level, but if you notice the muscular tension that is associated with the fear and you help people to release that unnecessary tension, then you can approach that fear indirectly. Right? Telling someone not to be fearful is usually not going to work. Usually an indirect method, such as the Alexander technique, a method of subtraction of unnecessary habits of muscular tension, will help you use yourself much more optimally.
About how the jaw functions, how their jaw functions.
I think so. I think in order to relieve a problem, you first have to become aware of the problem and to become aware of temporomandibular dysfunction.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, the reason it's called temporomandibular is there's a large bone on the side of the head called the temporal bone, and there's a series of muscles that control the lower jaw or the mandible. So that's where temporomandibular comes in. If you can picture that almost like the strings of a marionette are the muscles, and the jaw is the marionette being controlled by these muscles. And if you can, well, let's start with just some basic anatomy here, where people can locate where their temporomandibular joint is.
Yes, I think that would be excellent. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If now I'm going to suggest people putting their little fingers in their ears with their palms facing forward, but I'm a little bit hesitant to do that because then they won't hear the rest of the instructions. So maybe they ought to listen to what I suggest they do first of all, and then go ahead and place their little fingers. So if you put your little fingers, palm facing forward, into your ear opening, and then move your jaw from side to side, and what you feel moving there is the head, what's called the head of the condyle. You can feel that moving around as you move from side to side. Okay, so that is the bottom half of the temporomandibular joint. And this is where the jaw articulates with the skull. At this point, if you go up just a little bit from where you feel that condyle moving around, that skull, immovable bone. A lot of people have the idea that when the jaw opens, that there's a hinge axis there. If you can think of like a box with a hinge on one side, and you turn the box over, and as the lid swings open, that's the way the lower jaw opens. And in fact, that isn't the case. And having that body image can lead to a lot of problems. It constricts your movement, and it also constricts your neck and puts pressure on your larynx. It actually is uncomfortable, even though you can make that movement, that hinge axis movement. It's uncomfortable to do that. Another misconception.
Could we? I think it might be good just to elaborate on that a little bit. A hinge joint, as you say, might be opening and closing a box, or opening and closing a door, which actually is on a hinge. It's a very simple movement, and it may look as though that's what your jaw does, but as you say, it's somewhat more complicated than that. And I think it's probably fair to say that there's a sliding forward.
Yes.
Of that condyle,
exactly right.
As the mouth opens, so that as you open your mouth, your jaw not only lowers in space, let's say, but also has a little tendency to release. I'm not sure how to describe that direction, forward forward and down, and you can forward and down. Yeah, that would
by putting your fingers back in your ears and then closing your teeth together, you can feel the head of your lower jaw, the head of the condyle, closing the temporomandibular space. You can actually feel that ball on the top of your lower jaw moving up and constricting your joint space. Mm-hmm. Try that. Just put your little fingers in your ear again and close your teeth together, and you can feel that space closing down. Mm-hmm. And then by way of contrast, when you put your fingers back in your ear, just open your lower jaw, and you can immediately can't feel that head of the condyle anymore. It immediately drops forward and down where you can't palpate it anymore. So that lets you know that there's an arc going on. And what we found through computer tracking of the lower jaw, the movements of the lower jaw, is that if you think of a center of rotation, like the jaw, if the point of the chin is the outer portion of a circle, and it's going to describe an arc, where the center of that circle would be if you would project out the axis of rotation is actually if you go up under your ears and come down about 1/2 inch. If you think of that as the center of rotation, it just frees up your lower jaw movement magnificently. It's hard to talk about this. It would be easy to have an Alexander teacher describe that and be able to have you locate that. But if you go up to right underneath your earlobes, come down about 1/2 inch, and then think of that as where the center of the circle that would be scribed, the arc that would be scribed by the point of your chin as you open. Mm-hmm. And that makes it a must.
Okay, I'm afraid to allow you any more of these golden insights. The excitement and the thrill that you're experiencing right now just might not be good for you. I should only dole out these insights in small doses so that you don't start experiencing levels of unnecessary tension and compression with your excitement. So let's leave it there. I'll talk to you later.